Hello, everyone. One of the things I've learned about working in social care is that it's often the smallest moments that stay with you. I remember supporting a resident living with dementia who couldn't always remember my name. But every time I walked into a room, she would smile, reach out her hand, and say, I'm glad you're here. And in that moment, I realized that social care isn't just about helping someone with their daily needs, it's about giving people comfort, dignity, and reassurance, even when words are forgotten. My name is Biyi, and I work in social care here in Scotland. I'd like to thank the GRAPS team for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about my journey. And I suppose, if I'm being completely honest, social care wasn't necessarily something I came into with a grand plan. Sometimes in life, you just fall into something. You start somewhere, you learn, you meet people, you have experiences, and somewhere along the way, you develop passion for what you do. That has really been my experience with social care. What started as a job gradually became something I genuinely cared about. Working with older people, particularly people living with dementia, has taught me patience, compassion, and resilience. And the more I became involved in the sector, the more I began to understand that not just the experiences of the people we care for, but also the experiences of the people doing the care. And that's where my junior journey really started. I became, I didn't become involved in junior because I wanted a title. I become involved because I wanted to. I started seeing situations where workers needed somebody to listen to them, to explain things to them, or even simply tell them, actually, you have a right to ask questions about things. And as for me, that became particularly important when I started seeing the experiences of migrant workers. I want to make something clear though, because I think it's important to be honest about this. I work in a workplace where I have been able to build a good working relationship with management, and I wouldn't describe my own experience as a migrant care worker as one that is being badly treated. But being a union representative has given me the opportunity to hear and support other people's experiences. And that's where I've realized that my own experience is not necessarily everybody's experience. I've heard from migrant workers, particularly people working through agencies and in other organizations, who feel that because their visa sponsorship is connected to their employment, they have to be extremely careful about speaking up. I've heard concerns about people working long and unreasonable hours, people not receiving the pay they are entitled to, people struggling to get holidays approved, or sometimes even without understanding why their request was declined. And sometimes it's not even about a major dispute. It's something as simple as knowing what your rights are. I remember helping a colleague understand how they could request a parental leave. They simply didn't know that the policy even existed or that can be applied to their situation. And that experience really stayed with me because sometimes being a good union representative is not about fighting a big case. Sometimes it's about saying, oh, let me check this for you. Let me explain what the policy says. Let me help you make that request. And that can make a huge difference to somebody. There are also migrant families where both parents are working in social care, trying to build a life here, while also dealing with the pressure of child care and all of the pressures that come with that. These are real people with real life experiences and sometimes workplace policies that exist, which can make significant difference to them on how to assess them. And I think that's the biggest lessons I've learned as a junior representative. You can't represent people effectively if you don't listen to them. That was actually the thinking behind the migrant workers survey that I became involved in. I didn't simply just want to stand up and say, these are the problems migrant workers are facing based on my own personal experience or the few cases I've personally come across. I wanted to know what are other migrant workers actually experiencing, what are their concerns, what are they worried about, are these issues I'm hearing about isolated cases or are there common themes across the sector? So the idea behind the survey was really about giving migrant workers an opportunity to tell us in their own words what their experiences were. For me, that was important because if we're going to campaign for migrant workers, we need to make sure we're not speaking for people without actually listening to them. We need the evidence, we need their experiences, we need their voices. The survey was there for not just about collecting information, it was about creating a foundation for a campaign that is informed by people we're trying to represent. And that is probably one of the things I'm mostly proud of in my union journey. Seeing an idea that came from conversations with workers develop into something that can potentially contribute into a much bigger campaign. Being a black migrant woman working in social care has also taught me something about myself. Sometimes I feel like I have to prove myself twice. Sometimes you feel like you have to work a little harder. You need to demonstrate a little more, or even make sure you're doing everything right, simply because you don't want anyone to question whether you deserve to be in the room. And I think that experience has actually strengthened my commitment to union activism because I don't want the next migrant worker coming into social care to feel like they have to navigate everything alone. I want people to understand that they have rights. I want them to feel confident enough to ask questions. And I want them to know that being a migrant worker doesn't mean you should accept less. My journey into in the union has also taken me much further than I expected. When I first became involved, I thought I would only support what colleagues in my workplace. I never imagined that those conversations would eventually lead me into contributing into wider discussions about migrant workers and social care across Scotland. And that has taught me something very important. Never estimate when saying yes to becoming an activist can take you. So if you're watching this as someone going through the GRASP program, or you're wondering whether activism is for you, I would say this: give yourself a chance. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to be the loudest person in the room, and you don't even need to have all the answers. You just need to be willing to listen, to learn, to understand, and be willing to stand beside people. Because sometimes activism isn't a big campaign. Sometimes it's about helping work colleagues understand their rights, helping them to ask questions nobody wants to ask, or even making sure that somebody's voice is heard. And sometimes it's simply telling somebody you're not alone. Every activist starts somewhere. For me, it started as a care worker who wanted to do their job well, and it has grown into something much bigger. So as you continue your grasp journey, I encourage you not to just complete the program, but to think about the kind of representative you want to become. You want to become someone people can trust, someone people can approach, someone who listens before they speak, and someone that can be willing to stand up where it matters. Because frontline workers become when frontline workers become activists, we don't just change our workplaces, we help change the future of our sector. And when migrant workers, especially Black and any other underrepresented workers, find their voices within the union, we make that union stronger and more representative of the people it exists to serve. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you every success on your grasp journey.